innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software. You're invited to join our MEP and construction innovation adventure with a mission to propel this great industry forward. My guest today is Slater Latour, Chief Marketing and Product Officer at Newforma. He is focused on helping Newforma continue to build a great business by delivering valuable solutions to the AEC industry. Slater has held multiple corporate strategy and cross-functional leadership roles at vertical software, financial technology, financial services organization, ranging from early stage startups to one of the 10 largest diversified financial services provider in the world. Welcome to the show, Slater.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here, Todd. Looking forward to lively discussion.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with how you got involved with the construction industry.
Sure. So, my last company was not in construction and was more around commerce operations, inventory management, and we sold into large diversified retail firms. And after that company was sold and I was thinking about my next role, some of the people I'd gotten to know through that process introduced me to Brock Philp, who's our CEO, and we felt like there was a good fit given some of the projects I'd worked in to try to bring some of the concepts around software delivery and strategy from the other industries I'd worked in to construction. And I've been here a little over a year now, so steep learning curve certainly, but I feel like at this point I'm up to speed and know enough to be dangerous.
Nice. Well, it's a good industry to come into. I was a happy accident into construction technology myself. Very thankful for that happy accident, but yeah.
Same here.
Awesome. Well, for this conversation, really wanted to dive in more to interoperability and unpack that. I know both of us are passionate about that, but let's start with defining the terms. How do you define interoperability?
Sure. So in a really broad sense, it's around the compatibility of, I guess you just say data as a generalized term, and the ability for data to pass from one system to another system, and that layer between the two to translate differences in terminology, differences in format to a common understanding, so that instead of there being two systems with siloed data that can't talk to each other, that creates a huge administrative hassle, a lot of rework, potential for errors and omissions, just things you don't really want to see. And there's really no reason for it. The two systems should be able to talk to each other. If data exists in one piece of software and it has some relative structure, you should be able to pass it to another system if you design it the right way without losing anything.
Yeah. So, interoperability is become such the hot new buzzword of construction, but what are some maybe other industries that construction can look to learn from that they've handled interoperability well, or maybe they haven't? We can learn from their mishaps.
So I guess I'd start, just with my own background, I'd start thinking about, let's say financial services, right? The way financial services businesses transact from one firm to another is there's usually a common set of fields, right? Like, let's say you're talking about a transaction where someone buys 100 shares of Dell. Mm-hmm. Well, at Charles Schwab versus at Fidelity, the concept of buy 100 price and Dell is going to be the same. So, and there are differences with at the margins, but they're relatively the same. And so, if you look at fintech, there's been a massive explosion of API-based connectivity, so that you can securely transact that, submit that data across different siloed systems, so that you don't have huge effort to try to maintain. Two different ledgers manually, and because that's where human error can become a major problem. And similar thing when it comes to forms and as a comparison to like contract documents. In the past, there's been in the financial services space a lot of manual work to submit the forms, and these are forms that are required from a regulatory standpoint, and lots of rekeying of data, lots of problems with the data not getting rekeyed exactly right with like a long account number, and that could create all kinds of different errors and workflow problems, and that kind of stuff it's possible to eliminate that stuff, or to eliminate it 95%, so that you can really focus on areas where the disagreements are meaningful, or there's some real problems with certain documents. So it lets just people, it can be a much more secure and scalable way to keep those documents up to date, make sure data is correct, and be consistent from one institution to another.
Yeah. What do you see as some of the inherent and potential challenges with interoperability in the construction industry?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's it is different, right? Like the first thing to understand about interoperability is what are the limits of interoperability as it relates to the industry that you're focused on, right? So whereas if you have 1,000 financial transactions, 998 of them might be exactly the same. Mm-hmm. So we're not, and in construction, we're not making 1,000 of one thing. We're making 1,001 things. They're very unique, right? Like even if you are talking about the most modular, prefabbed, common design of a building, you're still going to have unique aspects of delivering that project based on the physical space, the site in which it's going to sit. Those are always unique. And then, things like utility, you're talking about a permanent building, is going to need to connect to power and water, and there's going to be variance there. So the key is to understand, okay, interoperability works best where you have a structured common set of things that need to go from one place to another. That might not always be the case, or in fact, the assumption should be it's not the case. And when you're talking about large, complex construction projects, so there will be limits that you don't see in other industries.
Yeah, I agree. The construction industry, there's so many layers of complexity on each project, even on the standardized projects that are out there. So how do you kind of take that into account, control for that variability among the different job sites?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't want to overpromise and say that's you're going to get 100% of the way there, because I don't think that's reasonable. But there, at the same time, one thing that's been fascinating for me to learn is just how structured the communications are through the construction phase of a project between the design and construction firms, and how that's all governed by contract documents, with a common set of fields and a structure and workflow around them. So those are the types of things where you have an opportunity, because there's enough structure to the data to make sure that one person's RFI and the supporting documentation around that is easily portable to another firm's RFI management solution, with all that supporting documentation, and then can flow back to resolve issues. So it's looking for those places through all the different workflows where there's a lot of structure and commonality, and focusing on those as your low-hanging fruit, and then building up from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for somebody who maybe is starting off on this journey of interoperability and really trying to wrap their minds around it, what kind of time investment and lift do you see to really make it practical?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, look, there's surveys out there that say that, on an average project, you'll see that a turnaround time in RFIs is around 10 days. And I don't know how recent that data is, but it sounds, based on what we've seen, I think it's gotten a little better than that, but that's still a reasonable benchmark. And so you have the question you have to ask yourself is how much time gets lost through that, just re-uploading documents, rekeying data that existed in someone's system in the first place, retrieving old emails for additional context. When you can eliminate at least as a starting point the administrative steps, you're going to start to save time. So it's like, what are the benchmarks that you want to start to bend the other way, and how can you make that go faster?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So one of the dynamics there that I see at play is separating out the good information that can be leveraged for insights, and the other stuff that is frankly just kind of noise in the background.
That's a good question. There's probably always going to be some noise, right? But there's also a way to make data searchable, findable, and transmissible, and make that process much faster. And then have the metrics in place around how you categorize certain, like whether it's, let's just go back to the RFI question. As from the design side of the equation, you're gonna, like, it makes sense in a post project best practices to do a postmortem and look through the RFIs that you received. Some will be unavoidable, like we talked about the site, the how the site was versus how it was thought to be originally. Utility configurations, in my experience, can often be a lot different, are not always properly documented, and so there can be issues that come up with that. So there's some things that are unavoidable, but then there's probably a way to look and see where the original project wasn't as well documented from the design side, and closing those gaps on the next project. So you're building institutional knowledge over time by looking at your dark spots, your blind spots. And similarly, if there are probably RFIs that get submitted that were not necessary, right? Like, so, there's survey data around our, from the designer's point of view, RFIs getting created, just as a defense mechanism on the contractor side. So you can use that type of classification of an RFI to evaluate, which partners you use, where you have the best and most efficient relationships in place. Mm-hmm. So it comes down to making sure the data is structured and categorized the right way for post-project evaluation, and then during the project, that, going back to the interoperability question, can you quickly find the stuff that you need to respond? And that's Newforma's whole mission is making that process go really fast, because all the project information is consolidated to a single place and accessible, so that you can quickly resolve issues that come up during construction.
Yeah. So this may be a bit of an oversimplification, but it seems like on the data collecting front, there's kind of two camps that are competing against each other. You have the one that is just, let's collect every single piece of information and data point that you can possibly gather, whether you have a plan to leverage it or not. Yep. And then you have the others that's, we're only going to collect exactly what we need, no more, no less. There's a happy medium probably there.
Yeah, probably a happy medium.
That the industry isn't fully leveraging, but where do you kind of fall on that spectrum then? Yeah,
that's a good question. It's easy to say happy medium, but there's also an argument for more is really better. So I think if you are, some of it also depends on how well it's organized, right? Like, data has to be organized for it to be useful. Like, I can throw a whole bunch of data at you, and without any particular structure, you'd you certainly wouldn't thank me. So I think it comes down to governance. More is better as long as, you have the tools in place to quickly drive insights from the data that you have at your fingertips. So yeah, structured organization will, to me, if those things are operating the right way, more is then better. More is not better if that structured organization is not in place.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there on the governance side of things. If you don't have the structure in place, I think then more is detrimental.
Exactly.
And if
Exactly.
you don't know what you're going to do with the data too, I don't know why you would care about it. It's just collecting dust and makes it harder to find what you want.
Exactly. It's I guess at a very basic level, it might be nice to know that it exists, but if you can't get to it, hard to see how that's useful.
Or if it is clouding the data that you actually are trying to get to.
Exactly.
And you need to get to, and you can't find it because it's just in this sea of data out there. I think it's pretty detrimental. So I'm a huge fan. Plan it out before you
plan it out, put the structure in place, set expectations. Put as much as you can out on the table at the beginning, so that you're not 2 or 3 years into a construction project and your stuff's literally siloed in 8 different places and you can't get to it.
Yeah, I think kind of going off the silo thing too. I think adding in different voices and departments in that analyzing of how you're going to use the data is crucial too, because you might not in your small window not use a piece of data, but it might be super valuable to collect for the company. You just don't have insight into that because it's for somebody else's department. So having those multiple voices and perspectives is critical too.
Yeah, the importance of just as an example, the importance of being able to manage your project related email is certainly important during the design and build phase of the project, because there's probably important decisions and context that's there. But there's for like a legal department after the fact, for archiving requirements, they have a totally different set of requirements. And so like having that input so that your project record keeping practice is designed to serve both while the project is being delivered and the needs of the project after it's already been delivered is so important.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have a story or an example of a company that you've seen do this really well and have that well thought out plan and connect everything together?
We've heard from customers. We've heard from customers that using the Newforma software, in a litigation event that unfortunately took place after, they were able to quickly find all of the email communication with the sign-offs to manage their risk in that event effectively after, because it was 2 or 3 years after the project had already happened. And, over the course of the project, 25,000 emails had been exchanged over several years. So we have tons of stories like that around how like the systems and the methods of organization have served the project well, both during and after.
Yeah, nice. Well, kind of circling back to the RFI process that you were speaking to, you kind of brought this up a bit. I want to go a little bit deeper. How and why do you really need to maintain the record of what happened? And then how do APIs really play into that?
Yeah. So certainly we got into it a little bit. So as retrospective data for their own performance or for the performance of their partners, super important. In the worst case scenario, the importance of that record to serve the firm from a risk management standpoint in the event that there is litigation related to something, that having that record is extremely important. And then to your question about to the question about why is interoperability important for efficiency, right? So given what we've just said, it makes sense that both on the contractor side of the equation and on the design side of the equation, both firms, regardless of what is the official project record, are going to have their own records of everything that happened as well. So, it goes back to where does the tension on between design and design firms and contractors start? It's like, well, it starts with even deciding on what's the system of record going to be, right? Since they're both going to have to maintain them. So if it's the contractor system of record, well, that means that the design firm is going to have to be doing duplicate entry on every RFI and submittal and set of documents that they need to exchange during the build phase. But there's no reason, there's enough structure and the technology exists to make it so that regardless of what the official system record is going to be, that data can pass seamlessly back and forth. So you're talking about, let's just in a case where it takes 5 minutes to locate, to distribute, add the supporting evidence. So even if that takes 5 minutes, you're talking about thousands of RFIs and document exchanges over the course of a project. That immediate sync between both systems, that's going to end up saving thousands of hours. Plus, you're not then relying on a person to make sure that all of the documentation is in two systems, because if it is in one system, it's in the other system. Right. So that kind of interoperability, it creates some level of objectivity, in that it's not like you can't just point the finger and say, you left this crucial photo for an RFI response when you uploaded it to our system. Like if it was in one system, it's in the other. So there's just less. It's objective. Technology is more objective than people are, in my experience. Yeah. But also just the time savings will add up, and at an incredible rate.
Yeah, for sure. So where do you see the potential there of blockchain in this process with interoperability?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, I get that a lot. So, I think with where the blockchain technology is today, it's probably not going to add a ton of speed. But you can easily imagine a world where like leveraging some of the things that blockchain does very well, in terms of being like a centralized ledger, that kind of connectivity from the different systems that the different firms working on a project can push data into a blockchain, and then you've got this single source of truth that's completely unalterable, and that could be something very powerful.
Thinking through a timeline for the construction industry, what do you see interoperability? How long until it reaches kind of that critical mass for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of progress made, to be sure, and the infrastructure that enables data to pass from one system to another is growing almost exponentially. So, we started the conversation. We talked about, let's start with the fact that we need to level set expectations around how much interoperability is possible, given how how that each project is so unique. But I would think the type of connectivity between systems that exists in other industries, to the extent that it's possible, it will be in place for construction in the next 5 to 10 years, just given how quickly technology is advancing. You've got players that have been in place for a very long time that are adding API technology to their older systems. The newer systems come in. The startups in the space generally think about that from the outset. So it's anything that has the structure to be exchanged across systems will be technologically possible very, very soon. And then where I think the industry can do a better job is, like, going back to the RFI problem. If there are common ways of categorizing RFIs. Just as to go back to our original example, there are things that are common, but what we've seen is that they can be enough different at within each firm that it's the syncing of those types of documents across systems can become difficult. So if the industry can somehow come together and put stronger governance around that, and around what definitions and what's the common understanding of different issues that pop up during the project, it'll be much easier to synchronize data across multiple systems.
Yeah, for sure. So when you're looking at integrating the different tech stacks, what are some determining factors for you to be able to do it successfully?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it starts with the availability. Like, just starts with, is there an API that we can consume, or do we have an API that they can consume? And then it's looking at, is this data structured enough or similarly enough in both systems that we can know that this field, however we've called it, let's say it's a project number. Is there an equivalent field? And I'm, in that example, of course there is, but how do we make sure that, our project number is the same as their project number? There needs to be at least some unique identifier
Right.
on both sides of data exchange to make the data exchange possible. And the more there are, the more you can do with it.
So Slater, thinking of another big trend that's coming up, which is digital twins, how do you see that playing in to the interoperability discussion moving forward?
Sure. So yeah, it's really early days in digital twins, and the usefulness of them is definitely well understood, especially for infrastructure and other really large capital projects. How that will affect the day-to-day business of AEC is unclear. But what I think can happen as we the growth of BIM has been well documented, so I don't need to go into that too much. But as BIM models become more interoperable across systems, and then you start to think about like location data, not just the address of the building is whatever the address is, but on what floor was the issue? Can you start to look at a digital twin and the record of the project, that as it was being delivered, and see when you're operating the asset, where the issues cropped up, changes that may, changes that had to be made, so that if you're going into it after the fact to do a refit or to I don't know, to change the building or rebuild it, you have a record, and that record is detailed and geolocated both, so to find all of the potential issues and thorny problems that could crop up in real time and really quickly.
Yeah, interesting. Well, how do people get a hold of you and find out more information of Newforma?
Absolutely. So the best way to do that is to go to our website, which is very easy to remember. It's www.newforma.com. Have a look around. We've got a lot of content on there, case studies with our customers. And if you like what you see, there's an easy way to sign up and get in touch with someone for a consultation.
Awesome. Well, last question for you. What does innovation mean to you?
Oh man, I'll keep it really simple. Innovation is when, for me, it's when an end user of one of our products starts using the product, and they just see their life getting better, making people's lives better.
Nice. I like it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Slater, thanks so much for joining and appreciate the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.